And now we've started to refit things. The first thing we're refitting is the replacement washer bottle. It's a straightforward replacement for the unit that's already there. Watch that you retain the bungs, and 3 bolts hold it on and take it off again. Well, the disused parts count is certainly increasing, but the good news is we've got the new slam panel on, we've got the new bumper on, and I'm now ready to assemble the front end. Great thing with the new slam panel in this kit is it really tidies up the front end no end. Nice clean ABS plastic type material. We've also taken the opportunity while everything's been stripped to just give the whole engine bay a bit of a clean, touched up some paint where required, and that is something that you can do when you're doing these kind of jobs yourself. And when I watch a lot of the companies on YouTube and things doing these jobs, you know, frankly, they don't get paid to do that, so they don't do it. But it's just a really great opportunity to give the whole front end of your van a good clean, a good tidy up, and a good check over whilst it's disassembled. The radiator mounts in a very slightly different way insofar as the bottom brackets now mount on the metal bumper, whereas in the T5 iteration they mount on the slam panel, and the top mounts in exactly the same way. Now note that the rubber brackets that are held onto the slam panel that hold the radiator, when you take the radiator off or when you take the slam panel off, they can just fall into the recess. So I had a real worry for a wee while thinking that we were missing something, but we weren't missing anything. These rubber mounts slide up and down, and they allow obviously the radiator some movement in operation. The bonnet is lifted and placed on the vehicle in exactly the same way as the old one came off. It's a 2-person job, be very careful. And the bonnet is held up by a gas strut. The gas strut comes in a kit with 2 nipples, but in my case there was already a nipple fitted on the bonnet. So it connects on here, and the other nipple that comes in the kit is screwed into a hole in the slam plate at the top there, and I'm just about to tighten that up just now. The struts are secured onto the nipples with metal clips that hold them in place. So these have to be gently prized off, and you can see there's a space in them for a small screwdriver. So gently prise them off, it opens the metal connection at the back, and that allows you to slip them on the nipple, and then you just replace the metal clip and it stays in place and it won't come off. Don't try and put them on without taking that metal clip out or releasing it, you will break them. With the slam panel, the new bumper fitted, the radiator attached, and the bonnet in place, it's now time to look to fit the new wings and to start to think about getting the panel lines nice and straight. The wings as supplied in the kit are genuine Volkswagen parts. It goes without saying that you should be careful how you handle these. I'm fortunate I've got the use of a carpeted garage, but obviously they do scuff and scrape very easily and get damaged before they're fitted on the van. We're going to attach these primarily using the bolts that we retained when we removed the old wings. That's the new wing panel now loosely located in place using the 3 bolts along the top of the bonnet edge and the 3 on the inner edge inside the wing here. Be very careful when you're opening the door, when you're putting the panel in place, because if the panel's in any way proud from the surface, of course there's a danger you'll catch it, and with a mechanical movement of the door you'll bend it very easily. The other thing to be aware of is that because it's a VW panel, it fits beautifully, there are no issues, and straight off without any kind of fettling or anything, the panel gaps are pretty good. But what you will see at the front is, because the shape of the 6.1 or the T6 rather is slightly different from the shape of the T5, we don't actually have a retaining hole for the bumper at the front. So this was the hole that was originally used, but our panel hole is actually a little bit further up. So what we will need to do is we will need to drill a hole here to attach the panel. A couple of options for that. You can either use the existing screw and the fastener, but I think what I'm probably going to do is to use a riv nut for the connection there. So because they're original parts and they fit well, it's reasonable to assume that you shouldn't have to bend anything to make it fit. If it's not fitting right first time, you've probably just caught the bracket in the wrong way. Just very carefully manipulate it and it will absolutely fall into place. So what I've found it easiest to do is to take the straight line from the edge of the door, make sure that it's aligned and the panel gap is even, then adjust the forward and back movement using the 3 screws inside the door, then get the line right on the top using the very top screw here, and then in a wee minute, once I've done the other side and we close the bonnet, we can then adjust the other 2 remaining screws here on the front one to get the bonnet line right as well. At this stage, the 2 front bolts securing the front top of the wing are still loose, but I've protected the top edge with some masking tape, and that's just because when we take the bonnet down, because of the cantilever action, we're not sure how it's going to line up with this panel, and what we don't want it to do is to do any damage. Now, I'm no panel fitter, but I think the other thing you've got to bear in mind, as my mate Dave says, who is an expert in these things, these vans when they're built, they don't have small gaps, so don't try and get the panels too close together. There's a reasonable gap of a few millimeters all around the panels. Just try and keep them even. So you can see when I bring the bonnet down onto the latch there, there's no gap at the front and there's a big gap at the back. So we'll do some adjustment on the bracket that holds the bonnet up. I'm just doing the adjustment on the 2 main bolts that hold the bonnet up, and you can see in this image they are slightly out of alignment, but with a bit of movement we should be able to straighten that up. Takes a bit of messing about to get the brackets on the bonnet in the right place, but I'm now getting close to where I want to be in terms of the panel gap. But at this stage, remember, the slam panel is still loose, so I want to tighten up the slam panel before we do any final adjustments. Just making sure that the locking mechanism that we transferred from the old bonnet is in line with the latch in the new slam panel. Just to make sure that the slam panel is nice and central, pretty close there. And that means we're adjusted centrally, and then we can adjust for height in a minute. Okay, so with the bonnet adjusted centrally, I've now got everything tightened up. So I've tightened up the slam panel and I've tightened up the bumper. So the whole front end is quite solid. The last bit of adjustment I now want to do on the wing panels is to adjust them in and out with those last 2 screws so that I've got a nice alignment at the front. Once we've done that, that's our panel work largely done. With all of the panels now fitted and the screws tightened, we can now look at the last remaining issue, which is, as we mentioned earlier, the fact that there's a difference between the 2 holes in the front of the panel. So what I'm now going to do is to mark and drill a hole here. I'm going to put in a riv nut and use a bolt just to secure it. You can see that's why I've left this one to last. There's actually very, very little movement in it, so it's not as if we're going to need it for any adjustment, because if you try and move that panel, you're just going to warp something else. So I'm pretty confident that that hole needs to be right where the panel is right now. I personally prefer this style of riv nut tool. I think you've got much more control and it's much easier to get into small spaces. This particular one was supplied by a company called Memfast. And when we remove the tool, you can see what we've done. We've put a threaded insert into that space where we need it to secure the bottom of the panel. Short bolt inserted, job done. So I'm really happy with the way the front end is coming on. And the next job we're now going to look at is fitting of the lights. Well done, you've made it to the end of part 2. I'm impressed. Please, if you want to carry on, click on the link above and you'll get the next video in this series. Also, please consider liking my channel and following Higher Ground Lifestyle. Keep watching, guys. Thanks so much.